My story is a refugee story, and as always, refugee story are very long and boring, but really emotionally draining. But I'll give you a 15-minute story, which won't take you long, but will be really interesting, and hopefully you can follow me afterward to give you the whole life. So I don't know how many of you know about South Sudan, or Sudan to be short. Some of you know it as Sudan, but now it's South Sudan. I come from South Sudan, and I think it's been 10 years now, or almost 10 years, since I came to Australia. And it has taken me a very joyful ride, both through my refugee journey and also through my life in Australia. So I'll give you a brief story about what happened in Sudan and why I happened to find myself in Australia. During the colonial period, the British administration decided to give independence to Sudan, but they were caught in two minds whether to actually leave Sudan as two nations or just leave it as Sudan itself. But through the political issues and the domination of the northern government, they decided to actually have Sudan as a unified country, not putting into factor the 60 or so ethnic communities that lived in Sudan, most of which are based in South Sudan, and only a few or one or two ethnic community lives in the north. So in itself, it has been two countries since then, but we've been living as a one country. So through those issues, it first started as an issue of spatial development, or a spread across of what people would term as the resource allocation. So in the north, all the resources were concentrated in the north, but the southern part was left all underdeveloped and no civilization at all. So that caused the first civil war, which started in 1955 prior to the independence. And then the second, it lasted until 1972 when the first agreement was signed. And that agreement didn't last any longer due to the same issues. As many other issues of development has arisen, but actually the issues that came into factor were the issues of religion and ethnic divides. So in 1972, that peace agreement lasted until 1983, and this was when a regime took over to sort of introduce a Islamic law to the whole country, not taking into factor that the southern part are all enemies or actually Christians. So that actually angered some of the few security forces and also few Southerners who were in the government forces to actually stage a mutiny, which started in 1983. That war lasted again for another 20 years or so until 2005 when the CPA was signed, which is Comprehensive Peace Agreement, with the facilitation of the United Nations and the rest of the countries that were part of that agreement. That put an end to the 21 years war, which I was part of it. In the war, I remember the first time I actually left my country and my village. I was actually away from my actual house. So I went to play, and all of a sudden, all we heard was airstrikes and actually gun sounds, and so we have to actually rush back home. And I remember on that day that my mother was just walking by, looking at us actually coming through. She spread her hand across, and that has to be probably the biggest or the most rememberable picture that actually remains in my mind of my country, and the last time I ever saw the green environment until I came to Kukuma. So that was the only emotional part of my journey, and I promise you I won't cry again in that moment. From then on, we went through many displaced camps, whether within Sudan or outside Sudan. And most of us actually ended up in Ethiopia. And coming back to Ethiopia, there was another war in Ethiopia itself, so most of the refugees have to actually come back to Sudan. And all the way through Sudan, a lot of people lost life, either through thirst or anger, or as well through attack from wild animals. And I know that bears are commonly not found here, but we have our own type of bear that actually eats people. So most of the people lost their lives through that, and as well as through the attacks of local communities that live in those areas who actually just attack refugees on their journey back to Sudan. So we lost many, many lives there. And we ended up actually crossing one of the tributaries of River Nile. And from there, we lost a lot of people, some of whom could not swim, and actually some of them had to actually remain behind into that particular garrison town, which was taken over by the government forces. Most of those people disappeared and never were to be found again, and some of them actually drowned in the river. We crossed the river and ended up in another few displaced camps before we make our way to the border. Making our way to the border again, we face a lot of challenges, and I know that one other significant incident of which I always make fun of my older brother was when a RPG landed next to us. My brother was carrying some luggage and he threw that luggage away. So I always actually pay him out because of that, because he was too scared to throw away all his luggage. So in any case, we made our way to the border of Kenya, where we seek refuge in Kakuma in 1994. Kakuma is a refugee camp that was mainly established because of the Sudanese refugees in 1992. And it was life in Kakuma that actually opened my mind to a lot of things that I currently have been working through. In Kakuma refugee camp, there were almost 50,000 people living in there, most of whom are from refugee background. And this education there was one of the most interesting things that people usually talked about, that there's lack of education. It wasn't the lack of education that was the issue. It was the actual teachers that we could not find, because most of those people who became teachers were either people who went to school in Arabic and just learned a basic English to be able to actually teach English, or some of them would be probably those who have actually studied school to maybe primary level and they could not actually finish their school and they left their countries. So we were actually struggling, but we made the best out of it. We had 70 people in a class, but that didn't really matter because it was normal. We thrived to actually be the best in class because pride was the only thing that actually stood between us as young kids. It was bad enough for me because I didn't want to go to nursery. I was too naughty to be in nursery because I beat up kids at school, at nursery. So I was actually sent to year 2. I started my year 2 with kids older than me. I was scared a lot at that level because there were a little bit of bigger boys, but that were always threatening me to either beat me in class and actually beat me outside class. So it was really struggling to maintain my smartness to be in the top of class so I don't get beaten in class and actually outside. I'll just take the outside beating. So in Kakuma, I got involved in 2 things, and that was drama play, and actually part of it was to advocate for child's right. So I established a club called the Child's Right Club, and I used to actually perform on Refugee Day every year in the refugee camp. Usually 20th June, we would perform a poem or a play or anything like that. So I got involved really and really passionate about that. I also got involved in scouting and became one of the secondary school scout leaders who usually take kids to camps and replicate what our movement was doing to be part of the army in the future if we ever do. So those are the 2 very important things that I got involved in. I took the drama part very serious because I love to act and I love to put things in play. I love to actually perform. The whole performing nature is in me, because I remember back in schools I would really go into class, and if I can't understand anything from that class, I will start singing. So I actually grew up loving singing. So I love how to sing. I love how to actually express my emotions through singing and express myself through songs. That's why partly I wrote songs and I actually wrote plays. They're part of my internal expression. So in the camps, although there were not enough teachers and not enough resources such as books and stuff like that, it was left to you to actually decide whether you want to learn or not. And deciding whether you want to learn has brought me today. And that decision in itself, I took it, I wanted to learn, and I learned. The second thing about the camp was that we survived on 3 kilograms of maize flour or maize itself, and maybe just a liter of oil for a fortnight. If you can't actually make those little ration that is given to you, it will be very difficult. So we actually space it out so that you have actually one day to feed on and another day you can go without food. And then I got involved a lot with soccer. So during the day, I would choose to go without food and go play soccer. And then when I come back, I will eat and actually feed myself. So it was a daily routine for me to go to soccer, go to clubs for my poems, and then come back home. So those were the little things that entertained me. The other part of the camps that was really, that always caught people's eyes is the instability of the camps. That didn't actually happen until it was in the late 2000 or around about the time when I left, because the local bandits, which are the local tribesmen from the Turkana region of Kenya, were part of them were actually did not have anything to eat, so they will come to the camp and actually loot whatever ration that was given to you by the United Nations. So they will come in and loot, and they usually have guns. And I remember when I was leaving the camp was under attack, and we have to actually rush to the United Nations compound or the offices to actually seek a hideout there. So when we went to the camp, it was only a small compound, so it couldn't fit 50,000 refugees or so. So some of us ended up coming back, and actually most of them died at that particular time. So that probably triggered the United Nations to probably made my process to Australia really quick, because my application was in at that time and it was approved, but we didn't know when was the flight and how. So that time we were advised that, yep, you will be flying out as soon as possible in the next 2-3 days. So they took us out of the camp in the next 2-3 days while the camp was under attack from the local bandit. So leaving the camps, I left a lot of memories behind there, but most of it was to actually help me settle here in Australia. And the first thing that I did here in Australia was to actually look for a school from Jesuit Refugee Services, because they were actually running a school, and if you make top 20 within the primary education, you will be sponsored into high school. So I wasn't fortunate enough to actually make top 20. I made top 20, but there were changes that we have to give girls some percentage. So the girls took those percentage and I was left behind, but still managed to get in. So when we came here with my brother, we looked for the Jesuit education. We first settled in Queensland, but after Queensland, we couldn't find any Jesuit education. So we moved around to look for one. We located here in Sydney. We tried to talk to them and they say, yeah, that's fine. First of all, went to St. Aloysius College, but St. Aloysius College was a day school and I could not travel from my home in Auburn to city. So we tried St. Ignatius Riverview and they say, okay, you can come on board. And we talked about the boarding process and we started boarding with my brother. I did year 11 and 12 at Riverview and then went on to do my Bachelor Arts degree at University of New South Wales. In the process, I continued doing my artwork, I continued starting a play, and the topic of this talk is called In My Shoes. And that was actually my first play that I wrote here in Australia, Walking in My Shoes. And it was performed at Riverside Theatre in Parramatta. Most of which was a story of my journey and of other kids that were refugees, and also their resilience to be able to cope with life here. And some of the things that they were going through were really difficult to actually tell, so they were actually expressing those issues that they were going through the play. And then I continued to actually participate in another show that was called My Name is Sud. I don't know, Sud means black, so my name is black. It was about a kid who faced racism in the street and actually faced difficulty with intergenerational conflict at home. So it was drawing into those kind of art. I find success in it. I find another way to actually express my stories and become part of the ongoing sort of development of my own self. So I haven't stopped. I'm in the process to actually make another drama, and it will be called, maybe if you like to hear it in the future, will be called Gangster Wannabe. That is because I see a lot of kids here, when they come here, they look at the TV and they think, I want to be a gangster. But in the end of the day, they don't make it to be gangster, because to be gangster, the real gangster is not what you wear. The real gangster is actually killing people. And that's not what they ended up being. They ended up just wasting their time on actually dressing inappropriately and actually doing things that don't really match what they will do in the future. And when they finish year 12, they barely get to university, they do not do anything, and they end up in the street. So that's what I want to do in the future. What I want you to learn from it, I don't want you to take all the difficulties I went through today, but what I want you to take from it is the model of United Nations has been actually exemplified in me. Their contribution to refugees is what has made the impact for me to be here today. Thank you.